Selection masks can be very useful for helping you isolate parts of the model for easier texturing. It's a completely optional thing, but I always end up creating some kind of selection masks, either through baking or by hand during the course of texturing. If you plan on using applications like Ddo for texturing, then these selections become even more essential. Baking selection masks does require some extra work. There are two ways that I use to bake selection masks. The first way involves polypaint from ZBrush, and the second way involves physically splitting your meshes apart. We'll take a look at both of them right now. In this example scene here, this is the end result that I have here. And this is the high polygon model. So what my goal here was to mask out each of these components here in an easy way for texturing. And this is kind of the end result. I mean, this is a terrible texture, it's just flat colors, but hopefully it illustrates that you can easily set this up so that I could, for example, if I was to take this to completion and I wanted to make this metal and this wood, or things like that, it would be pretty easy to isolate. And so the first way is through polypainting in ZBrush. And if I jump to ZBrush, I have the same scene here. And what I've done is I've assigned a polypaint color to each object here. You see these objects correspond with the objects I have here. Now, for the polypaint method, you actually don't have to have and then when I bake the masks, then the mask would bake with these colors here. So the goal is to assign different colors to all the parts that you want to have masked out. And this works fine in most situations. You shouldn't run into a situation where you are running out of colors, because all you really have to do is make sure that you don't have two of the same colors right next to each other. And if I wanted to, I could even paint by hand a different color onto, make sure you have Z add and Z sub off and only RGB on if you plan on actually painting. And you could do it like this too, although you kind of have to be careful because this is kind of a gradual transition here. It's not a very sharp one, and then it will make it difficult to isolate these selections later in Photoshop. But again, I could just I'll just color pick this with C, and I'll fill this back with blue. And then all you have to do is export each of these subtools as OBJ files, and then when you bring it into XNormal to do the actual bake, then it'll come with the vertex colors and things will work. In XNormal, what you want to do is load up your high resolution meshes and your low resolution mesh as normal. But again, same thing goes as with your baking vertex color. What you need to do is you need to turn off ignore per vertex color here in order for your polypaint to render correctly. And then baking options, scroll down to bake high poly vertex colors. Again, default options are fine. And then bake. The second way I'd like to talk about baking selection masks involves having your object split up into different objects. And what I have here, you can see each of these is separate already. I built it specifically for that purpose. But if you didn't, if for example you had sculpted this in ZBrush from a single mesh, then what you'd have to do is actually mask out pieces and extract it, or do whatever you can to try to separate them into actual chunks, and then export all of these as their own OBJ file. And then when you bring it into, if you go back to XNormal, I mean this is the exact same in this case, but the previous method could have been done with just a single high-res source OBJ, whereas for this second method you need to have each one of these split up. So I've got that, and it actually doesn't even matter if it's set to ignore per vertex color or not. I would just turn it back on anyway in case I need to go back and bake something else from this. Low definition meshes is exactly the same, and for bake options, what you want to do instead is go to bake base texture. Now this isn't what this option is supposed to be used for, but it'll do the job for what I need right now. If you go to the options for that, by default it's set to draw using this color, and you could choose whatever color. And in this case, if I had left it at red, it would fill all of my UV islands with red. But I don't want that, so I'm going to say write object ID if no texture. So what XNormal is going to do is, you can see here when it generates, is that it's going to kind of assign random colors to each of those high resolution objects, and this is creates pretty much the same result. Like you could easily select these colors and create masks out of them. Back in Photoshop here, you can see on the right I have the map that I had baked using the polypaint method, and on the left I have a map baked using the separate object method. And they both work pretty much the same way. You would select by color typically, and then transfer that selection to your texture, and then use that as a mask for whatever you needed. Interesting thing to point out about this mask here on the left is that if you take a look at the red and green blue channels, they're actually almost ready-made masks for you. I mean, you'd have to isolate it to the parts that you need specifically, but it could be a good alternative to selecting by color if you didn't want to do it that way. And selecting by color is a pretty simple thing to do in Photoshop. If you go to the top, select color range, you bring up this menu here, and you could select anywhere on your texture here, on your map here, and it will show you a preview of what it will select. And you could change the fuzziness here. You might have to give this a little bit of trial and error to see how much fuzziness will give you the selection that you want. And you could change the preview method, and then just say OK, and then you can see it made a selection here with the marquee marching ants. So you could do is if you press M to go to the marquee tool, you could drag this over to your texturing document, and normally it won't come in the right place. But if these are the same document size, which I know they are, then what you can do is hold down Shift just before you let go of the mouse button here. Then it'll appear in the exact same place. The thing about that is you want to make sure that you don't have a selection already, because if you try to do that now, holding shift, then it'll like go into the middle of whatever selection you had. So you don't want that. Either you want the whole canvas selected or no selection at all. So hold down shift, drag and drop, and there you go. You got a nice ready-made mask here. And what I've already done is I've already made these hue and saturation adjustment layers, and I've just filled it in. You can see in the alpha channel here. It's already set up for that. But if I wanted to make a new one, all I have to do is either make a new layer, and I can just fill it with black, for example. And then anytime I needed to select this, to make this kind of selection, then all I would need to do, I could just keep that layer off if I wanted to, is if you control click a layer, then it will select all the pixels there, and so you automatically get a selection that you can work with. So what I did in this case, if you really wanted to do hue saturation adjustment layers, is with the selection already made, you can go hue saturation, and then it'll make a new layer, and it'll take whatever selection you had already, and it would automatically fill it into the alpha channel, or the mask, I should say, of that layer. But if you didn't say you didn't have a selection to begin with, and you already made it, and you made a hue saturation layer, and now you want to put that selection in, that's really easy to do too. You could just make that selection. I'm control clicking this layer because that's where the selection is, and then I can alt click into that mask, which lets you visually go inside of it, and then you could, now that you're inside of this mask, you can fill it with whatever color you want. In this case, I'll fill it with black, but that's actually the opposite of what I want, so just control I to invert, and there you got the same effect now. And I could just turn on colorize, change the color to whatever I want. There you go. That's pretty much selection masks in a nutshell.